Today, I want to talk about one of the biggest questions we all face at some point in our lives. A question we either run from or desperately search for an answer to. Why are some people happy and others are not? Let's start somewhere unexpected. A detective, Hercule Poirot. Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express. In the story, a man is killed aboard a train. Poirot discovers that every single passenger in the car was somehow connected to the victim. The murder was so cleverly designed that no one person could be directly accused. Poirot offers two theories. First, a lone killer boarded at the previous station, committed the murder, and slipped away. Second, everyone was involved, a web of interconnected causes working together. And then he says, simple minds always choose the first theory. This is exactly the mistake we make about happiness. We tell ourselves, when I get married, I'll be happy. When I have money, when I get the job. One killer, one solution, one rescue point. But the reality? Happiness looks more like that murder on the train, a complex network of overlapping factors, each playing its part. And whoever searches for a single cause will never find the real answer. This is what I'd call the technology alibi, the belief that science will one day find the one thing responsible. But many thinkers in medicine, psychology, and social science say, that one thing doesn't exist. Stop looking for it. The first thing science tells us about happiness is something most people don't expect. The majority of people across the world are already happy. When researchers ask people, even in countries with serious economic hardships, 50 to 60% say they are completely happy. Nearly 90% say they are at least somewhat happy, which means being happy is the norm, not the exception. If you don't feel that way right now, the real question isn't, why is life so hard? The real question is, what happened that pushed me away from that baseline? Now, people with psychiatric conditions are a different story. When someone has depression, anxiety, OCD, or social phobia, their sense of life satisfaction drops dramatically, sometimes 2 full standard deviations below the population average. Only about 10% of people with depression report life satisfaction anywhere near what the average person reports. And social anxiety in particular has a very strong relationship with unhappiness. Constantly being tense around other people, worried about how you come across, flustered when others look at you, quietly drains your well-being more than most people realize. More than education level, more than gender. The person who is easygoing in social settings, who adapts naturally, who doesn't overthink every interaction, they tend to report significantly higher happiness, even if everything else in their life looks the same on paper. The second thing science discovered, happiness has 2 distinct types. The first is hedonic well-being. This is pleasure-based happiness, energy, laughter. The person who's always full of life, always ready to say yes, always the last to leave the gathering, always looking for the next experience. Morning comes and they're already running. The second is eudaimonic well-being. This is meaning-based happiness, purpose, a sense of direction, the feeling of belonging somewhere, knowing who you are. This person might not always be laughing, but they're satisfied with themselves. They feel that what they're doing matters. These 2 types are correlated, but they're not the same thing. Their correlation is around 0.5, related but genuinely independent dimensions. And here's what's fascinating. Psychiatric conditions like depression and anxiety destroy hedonic well-being far more than eudaimonic well-being. That's why you can meet someone who is filled with anxiety, someone who can barely board a plane without medication, and yet they are deeply devoted to their family, passionately committed to their work, clear about their purpose. Their meaning is intact, even when their joy is fractured. This distinction matters enormously. If you feel unhappy, the first question to ask yourself is, which type am I missing? Because the answer completely changes what you should do about it. Now let's talk about something most of us have strong feelings about: money. Does money buy happiness? The answer is, it depends entirely on where you're starting from. Below a certain threshold, roughly $10,000 a year, or about $800 to $1,000 a month, income has a direct and powerful relationship with happiness. Every increase in income at this level makes a real, tangible difference. Because what you're buying is basic security: food, healthcare, a roof, the ability to see a doctor when something goes wrong. But above that threshold, the relationship collapses. Even if your income doubles, triples, grows 20 times over, your well-being increases by only a fraction. To raise your well-being by 10% above this line, your income needs to increase roughly 20-fold. The return on investment for happiness becomes nearly zero. And one of the most striking findings in this area, from 1970 to 2010, in wealthy countries like Germany, England, and France, despite enormous economic growth, average happiness levels barely moved. Societies got richer, people did not get happier. This is known as the Easterlin Paradox, named after economist Richard Easterlin, and it tells us something uncomfortable. After a certain point, accumulating more does not move the needle on how good your life actually feels. So, if money doesn't do it above a certain level, what about major life events? This is where things get really counterintuitive. A landmark study from 1978 by Brickman and Campbell followed two groups. The first, lottery winners who had won between $50,000 and $1 million. The second, people who had been paralyzed in accidents. 18 months later, the lottery winners had returned almost entirely to their pre-winning happiness level. The paralyzed individuals had recovered significantly. Not completely, but far more than expected. What this reveals is a concept called the hedonic treadmill. No matter how hard you run toward happiness, a promotion, a new relationship, a new city, you tend to return to roughly the same emotional baseline you started from. The treadmill keeps moving. You keep running, you stay in the same place. Connected to this is the concept of a hedonic set point. Think of it like a thermostat. It's calibrated to a specific temperature. Life events push it up or down temporarily, but it always gravitates back. And here's the painful asymmetry that this research revealed. Positive events fade completely. Their effect wears off and you return to baseline. Negative events also fade, but not entirely. A serious loss or trauma leaves a small, permanent mark. You recover most of the way, but not all the way. This means, if you're waiting for the right event to finally make you happy, you will keep waiting. Events don't change the thermostat. They only move the temperature temporarily. The same applies to marriage. Research consistently shows that happiness rises slightly in the period just before and just after marriage, and then returns to baseline within a few years. By year 8, average happiness is actually slightly lower than pre-marriage levels. Not because marriage is bad, but because the event itself doesn't change your set point. The person who will make you happy does not exist. Not because love isn't real, but because another person cannot override your internal thermostat. So what actually determines where that thermostat is set? One of the most powerful answers is a personality trait called neuroticism. Neuroticism refers to individual differences in negative emotional responses. How strongly and how frequently you experience anxiety, anger, worry, irritability, and sadness in response to frustration, loss, or threat. It's partly heritable. It shows up early in childhood. Some children are simply wired to respond more intensely to stress. The child who goes to anyone's arms, eats anything, falls asleep anywhere, low neuroticism. The child who needs everything exactly right, who gets upset easily, who worries about everything, high neuroticism. In adults, high neuroticism looks like a tendency to ruminate, to be sensitive to rejection, to experience social interactions as threatening, to feel emotions intensely and for longer than others do. And it is one of the strongest predictors of your happiness set point. More than your income, more than your education, more than your gender. But here's what matters. Neuroticism is not a fixed life sentence. Many people genuinely outgrow it as they age. The correlation between childhood neuroticism and adult neuroticism is not as high as you might think, meaning change is genuinely possible. Research by Jerome Kagan showed that many highly anxious children become much less anxious adults. And even when neuroticism doesn't disappear, its toxicity can be reduced. The anxiety that once paralyzed you can become the engine that drives you, the reason you prepare more carefully, think more thoroughly, take fewer reckless risks. Neuroticism in its mature form becomes fuel, not poison. Think of your traits like a hand of cards. There are no objectively good or bad cards. There's only the game and how well you play what you're holding. Hidden inside neuroticism is something almost no one talks about openly: envy. Envy is one of the most powerful and most concealed forces shaping human well-being. Research found something striking. People confess to unconventional sexual behavior more easily than they admit to feeling envious. It is that deeply buried, that shameful, that universal. And yet it is everywhere, in workplaces, in families, between neighbors, between friends. You don't envy billionaires. You envy the colleague who earns 5% more than you. You envy the friend whose relationship looks slightly more stable than yours. Envy operates at close range, over small things, and it quietly consumes enormous amounts of psychological energy. There are two types. Malignant envy wants to destroy what the other person has. It doesn't say, "I want what you have." It says, "You shouldn't have it." It sabotages. It tears down. Anthropologists studying primitive societies found that one of the most common anxieties across all human cultures, at every level of development, was envy. People would go to extraordinary lengths to damage others' possessions, comfort, or success. Not because it benefited them, but because seeing others do better was unbearable. Benign envy is different. It says, "They got there. Why not me?" And it becomes fuel, turning resentment into ambition, redirecting hostility into personal drive. When envy matures, it stops being about tearing others down and starts being about building yourself up. The difference between these two types of envy can determine the entire trajectory of a life. And alongside envy lives its close companion, schadenfreude, the quiet pleasure we feel at others' misfortune. Good, serves them right. This emotion is more universal than any of us would like to admit. Even serious philosophers have documented it. Thomas Aquinas wrote that one of the pleasures of the saved in heaven was watching the suffering of those in hell. That's how deeply built into human psychology this tendency is. The more we feed envy and schadenfreude, the more they poison our own well-being. Not because of some moral law, but because the emotional energy they consume and the social isolation they eventually produce are genuinely toxic to health. Speaking of social isolation, let's talk about something that kills. Literally. Loneliness. A major meta-analysis reviewing 148 studies and over 300,000 people found that social isolation predicts early mortality as powerfully as smoking, cardiovascular disease, and physical inactivity. Not physical aloneness. You can live alone and not be lonely. Emotional loneliness. The feeling that no one genuinely cares whether you're okay. Having even one person in your life who truly sees you, someone you might speak to only occasionally, who checks in, who would notice if something was wrong, is at a statistical level as protective to your health as quitting smoking. We spend enormous amounts of time and money talking about diet, exercise, and medical checkups. We barely talk about this, and the evidence suggests we have our priorities wrong. Now let's talk about one of the most underestimated causes of human suffering: boredom. Not sadness, not anxiety, boredom. People who frequently experience boredom have roughly 2.5 times higher mortality over a 25-year period. Bored to death is not just a phrase, it is a statistical finding. And here's the counterintuitive part. More options do not cure boredom, they make it worse. When a child has 50 toys and says, "I'm bored," buying 2 more toys deepens the problem. Researchers found that increasing available options consistently fails to reduce boredom and often worsens it. Like an addiction, the dose escalates while the effect diminishes. A person 50 years ago watching one television channel was more genuinely absorbed in what they were watching than someone today with access to 10,000 shows who scrolls for 40 minutes and watches nothing. More choice, less engagement, more boredom. The same pattern appears in relationships. When couples grow cold toward each other, we tend to assume it's incompatibility or unresolved conflict. But often, the actual driver is boredom, the slow erosion of curiosity and novelty. And the instinct to fix this by finding someone new is the same mistake as buying more toys. It treats the symptom while deepening the pattern. The cure for boredom is always the same. Go deeper, not wider. Build a more profound relationship with existing things, existing work, existing people, existing interests. The capacity to do this is a trainable skill. Like a muscle, it strengthens with deliberate use. In an era of infinite options and endless stimulation, the ability to go deep, to be genuinely absorbed by something, is one of the rarest and most valuable things a person can cultivate. This brings us to one of the most important and most misunderstood findings in all of happiness research. Positive thinking does not work the way you've been told. A study at Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich followed students about to enter the job market. Researchers measured how positively each student fantasized about their future success. 2 years later, they tracked the actual outcomes: jobs found, income earned, offers received. The result was striking. Students who fantasized most positively about their futures found fewer jobs, received fewer offers, and earned less income than those who did not. The same pattern appeared in romantic relationships. Students who most intensely fantasized about being with someone they had a crush on were the least likely, 5 months later, to have confessed their feelings or formed any kind of relationship with that person. And in post-surgical recovery, patients recovering from hip replacement surgery who had the most optimistic, rosy fantasies about their recovery actually showed worse physical outcomes: less range of motion, more difficulty walking. Why does this keep happening? Because fantasizing about success gives you the emotional reward of achievement without requiring the effort that actually produces it. The fantasy satisfies the need the real thing was supposed to satisfy, and so the drive to pursue the real thing quietly decreases. Positive thinking in this sense acts as a sedative for ambition, rather than a fuel for it. What actually predicts success is something fundamentally different: expectation grounded in past effort. Not everything will work out because I believe in myself, but I have faced difficult challenges before and worked through them. I know from direct experience what I'm capable of. I have a concrete, evidence-based reason to believe I can do this. This is not optimism. This is efficacy. Confidence earned through experience, not manufactured through imagination. The psychologist Gabriella Oettingen has documented this research extensively in her book, Rethinking Positive Thinking. Her core message: stop fantasizing about the destination. Start building the evidence through real action, real effort, real results that gives you genuine reasons to believe in yourself. And this brings us to the final variable, the one that, in the long run, outweighs almost everything else: effort. People who actively fight for their lives, who work toward their goals, who push through resistance, who earn their outcomes, are significantly happier than people who receive equivalent outcomes passively. It is the effort itself, not just the result, that builds well-being. The struggle is not an obstacle to happiness. It is one of its primary ingredients. This also explains a strange paradox. As wealthy societies have become more comfortable, their average happiness has not increased. Because when comfort becomes the default, when effort is no longer required, something essential is removed from life. The thing that makes achievement feel meaningful is the difficulty that preceded it. So let's bring everything together. There is no single killer. There is no one thing you can fix, acquire, achieve, or eliminate that will make you happy. What shapes your well-being is a web, a complex, interacting system of forces. Whether you have purpose, not just pleasure, whether your income is covering genuine needs or just feeding social comparison, whether the psychiatric conditions that drain hedonic joy are being addressed, whether your envy is propelling you forward or quietly destroying what's around you, whether you have even one person who genuinely cares about you, whether you are going deep into your life or skimming the surface of infinite options and staying perpetually bored, whether your confidence is built on real evidence from real effort or on fantasies that feel good but change nothing, and whether you are fighting for your life every day or waiting for the right circumstances to finally arrive. Happiness is not an event. It is not a destination. It is not something that will appear when the conditions finally align. It is something constructed, slowly, deliberately, imperfectly, through choices made over time. And that is genuinely good news, because it means the most important variable is not luck, not your circumstances at birth, not your genes. It's what you do with what you have, every day, over time.